think we can go ahead and get started here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to Spare's webinar on providing a top-tier transit experience. We're very excited to be joined by some incredible panelists today to talk about how you can expand your services and improve your overall rider experience without increasing your fleet size. My name is Brianna. I am Spare's Marketing Campaign Specialist, and I will be your moderator for today's session. During the webinar, we encourage you to ask questions and engage with our panelists. There is a Q&A box as well as a chat forum that we will go through towards the end of the webinar for any questions asked to our panelists. We will also have a representative answering any questions directed to Spare throughout the panel discussion. Joining us today will be Kristoffer Hansen, CEO and co-founder of Spare. Kristoffer is extremely passionate about building a product that can have lasting impacts on the world, which drives him to be constantly improving Spare's platform. Kristoffer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
We also have Lindsay Mason. She is the director of off-campus life at Colorado State University. Lindsay has been supporting Safe Ride programs for nearly a decade. In addition to serving as the director of off-campus life at CSU, Lindsay is on leadership boards supporting commuter students and Safe Ride programs across the nation. Lindsay, happy to have you here. We also have Bonnie Epstein from Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority. Bonnie has been a part of the PSTA for almost 7 years and is currently the Director of Mobility Services. She oversees the PSTA Access program and the Mobility on Demand programs. Bonnie, happy to have you here as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited for the webinar.
And last but certainly not least, we have Paul Davis. He is the Director of Transit and Micromobility Partnerships at Lyft. Paul brings his past experiences as a transit service planner in San Diego and an urban sustainability researcher for the Natural Resources Defense Council to his current role at Lyft, where he works to build transit and micromobility partnerships. Through agency partnerships, he works to expand mobility and mode shift to transit. Paul, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
In today's session, we're going to be discussing current challenges in the transit industry, how to utilize public-private partnerships, and the impact those partnerships can have on the rider experience. We will also discuss the future of those partnerships and how you can make a business case for them. So jumping right into things, because as we all know, transit companies face challenges every single day in rolling out optimal services that meet their riders' needs. So let's take a moment to talk about some of the challenges our panelists have faced when delivering a reliable service to their communities. Lindsay, we're going to kick it off with you. Can you start by giving us some background into what you do at CSU and how it's recently evolved?
Absolutely. So my office, Off Campus Life at Colorado State, is the office that supports our students that are living off campus, which includes our commuter students and helping them find ways to get around town. We specifically operate our Safe Ride program, or what's called RAM Ride, which operates Friday and Saturday nights from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. We have 15 cars out and about in the city of Fort Collins, giving students rides wherever they need to go that night. RAM Ride was certainly built to prevent drunk driving, and you'll know our late time hours, but you don't have to be intoxicated to use our service. And uniquely, it is other CSU students that are driving the vehicles, but they're not paid employees. They're volunteers, and sometimes, most often, one-time volunteers. So they come in, they get a 30-minute training, and then we put them on the road, and they're out there giving safe rides to their fellow Rams. So in thinking about recent evolution, RAM Ride used to only be a weekend operation just in town, only for students that lived in Fort Collins or needed to get around Fort Collins. But we've expanded in two ways. One is doing more work around basic needs. So helping our students be able to access food by delivering food to them, and also being able to provide rides to them outside of our normal operation hours. And that has really come to us because of our partnership with Lyft, that we are able to provide Lyft codes to students so that they can get free rides during the day if they're not able to get to class or whatnot. But then additionally, what I'm most proud of is that we are able to give those free, safe rides to students nationwide. So we know we have a ton of students that are choosing to Zoom in for classes. So maybe they go down to Denver for a while and are Zooming in from their classes. I can still support them through my Lyft partnership, regardless if they're in my city or not. So that's an evolution that has been particularly exciting for us.
Wow, talk about breaking through the limits of your fleet. I mean, being able to give your students nationwide access to your service is pretty cool. Bonnie, we're also curious to learn about PSTA's Mobility on Demand program and some of the ways you too are growing and evolving.
Yeah, for sure. So PSTA, we're a mid-sized transit agency in St. Petersburg, Florida. A few years ago, I think, starting in 2016, we really noticed that our ADA paratransit program, which all transit agencies are required to provide ADA paratransit service, really started gaining in popularity. We had more riders wanting to join the service and existing riders wanting to take more trips. So, thinking about how do we meet this demand while, not increasing our costs. So we wanted to introduce a program that we now have called our Mobility on Demand service. Basically, this program is open to anyone in our ADA paratransit program, but instead of calling by 5 p.m. the day before for a pre-scheduled ADA paratransit ride, they call us on demand for rides curb to curb, and we use Uber, Lyft, local taxi, and a local wheelchair provider. So we started this program back in 2018. We really started to try to grow the program throughout 2019, but really where we saw the most growth was in 2020 and in 2021. And actually today, as recently as this spring, we've seen a 50-50 split between traditional ADA paratransit service and our Mobility on Demand program. So we're really excited that we're able to offer more rides to our customers, but not increase our costs that much.
That's amazing to hear, Bonnie. Would you have any insight into has this partnership with Lyft or being able to use other fleet services filled in any gaps within your services at all?
Yeah, I mean, our Mobility on Demand program, we basically cover our entire county with our ADA paratransit service. We're covering our entire county with the Mobility on Demand program. But really, the Mobility on Demand program and what we're able to offer with the partnership with Lyft is the ability for riders to take those on-demand trips, the types of trips that they're not really able to take with pre-scheduled paratransit service. So returns from doctor's appointments. You never know when you're going to get out of the doctor. So using the Mobility on Demand program has been really helpful there, but also for last minute shifts at work, but other things that we hadn't really thought about, like making returns for things, these really quick trips, they're probably really hard to make with pre-scheduled paratransit service with the 30-minute pickup window. You need to leave time between the drop-off and your next pickup. You can use the Mobility on Demand service, and our riders really appreciate that. Then they really take advantage of the service. Once a rider decides to use the Mobility on Demand program, they don't look back.
It's really interesting to hear, especially about how partnerships like this have been able to fill in some gaps and identify areas where maybe you never thought of before. We see this approach from transit programs all the time, using third-party providers to fill gaps within their services. And by taking this approach, they can expand their service offerings without needing to expand their fleet size. It enables transit programs to offer a greater range of services without needing to increase their costs, just like Bonnie, you and Lindsay have previously mentioned. I want to switch our gears over to Kristoffer and Paul, as Lyft and Spare has just announced a very exciting new partnership. And I'm curious to learn more about what motivated this partnership and what does it enable for agencies. Paul, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having us here today. Over the years, we've seen a growing number of programs where universities and agencies, just like Bonnie discussed at PSTA and Lindsay at CSU, where they were working to run Lyft alongside the dedicated fleets for their transportation services, right? So we're really excited about this partnership with Spare as we see the opportunity together to allow for the seamless commingling of dedicated vehicles in the Lyft network, which has been happening anyways, and just bring that closer together. The partnership will allow agencies, to create dedicated fleet microtransit and paratransit programs and late night programs that can easily and cost effectively respond to fluctuations in demand by leveraging the Lyft network. So the service will always be reliable. It'll always be there when people need it most, right? So we're hoping to help agencies through this partnership to bring these benefits to more riders and easily integrate these dynamic and on-demand programs into their existing transit services. Yeah, we're super excited about the work with Spare and even more excited to see how organizations will innovate and work with the new product to build their transportation programs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Paul. Kristoffer, also curious to hear from you and building off of Paul's point around integration, how partnerships like this impact the future, which could look like multimodal mobility. Would you care to elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the reason why we're going down this path at Spare is really about to what Bonnie and Lindsay said about, how do we deal with increasing demand on both paratransit and microtransit and other types of services without drastically increasing cost by adding in additional dedicated vehicles? And this is really one of the driving pieces of this partnership, is basically tapping into being able to have our partners be able to tap into the Lyft network to make it a seamless way for them to deliver more rides at a lower cost, but also deliver those rides at a much better rider experience where we can almost guarantee wait times and other really exciting things. So the way we looked at how to actually do this integration was that we wanted to be as seamless as possible. So people are using the Lyft integration within Spare, you'll be able to just send trips to Spare or send trips to dedicated vehicles or other providers in a super seamless manner. And we can also even set parameters around auto selecting providers based on multiple different KPIs. So there's a lot there already that we've done, and there's some really, really exciting things that we're hoping to take this partnership next.
You mentioned, seamless integration, and it reminds me, Lindsay, your students have experienced that using the Lyft integration at CSU in the RamRide program. Do you care to kind of chat a little bit more about how that's impacted them?
I feel incredibly fortunate to be working with Spare and Lyft because the integration has been so smooth and has gone so well. And I think about multiple ways that we integrate. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity for Spare to be supporting us with so much, of the tech background that I get to focus on what I'm good at. I'm good at student development and helping build community, and I don't have to build and maintain a dispatch system, And then I also think about the way that Lyft fills in some gaps for us and how that integrates into RamRide. So for example, RamRide runs Friday and Saturday nights. As I mentioned, though, we are mostly volunteer run. And every once in a while, we don't have enough volunteers on one night. And so our students, if they open up the white label CSU RamRide app, and before it was RamRide's not running tonight because we didn't have enough volunteers for the evening. Now I can flip the money that I would have been paying for those volunteers, which are mostly student organizations fundraising for their student org. I can flip that money and say, through the CSU RamRide app to say, oh, but you can get a free Lyft ride, and I can put money into Lyft rides, and it's instant, and students are finding that information in the same location just through my app. And so that the integration through that. And again, through like nationwide rides. And I'm really excited about what we're working towards is, and I think Kristoffer was mentioning this, that when students open up their app, they will be able to choose from the same app, whether they want to take a Lyft ride that maybe has a shorter wait time behind it, but costs a few dollars, or maybe they want to wait a little bit longer for a Ram ride, but it's free. They get the choice and the agency, what they want to do. And it's right there in the same app, and they get to compare that information, wait times and costs to make their decision. So that integration, I know we're still working towards, and I'm really excited for that.
Awesome. Well, being able to provide riders choices is never a bad thing, but oftentimes it's a big concern when making changes to your services is how it will affect that rider experience. Obviously, we want riders to be a champion of the service, and ultimately that means giving them the options that they can choose the best experience for them. So Paul, a question for you. Lyft is already providing an excellent service on their own. So I'm curious when Lyft started to think about how they could use that proven track record to collaborate with transit systems.
Yeah, sure. Supporting transit really has been like core to Lyft's ethos and mission since our founding. Lyft was actually co-founded by the youngest board member at Santa Barbara's transit agency, who was also happened to be the campus sustainability coordinator at UC Santa Barbara at the same time. And we really started as a carpool company and have always been focused on how to drive more users into shared rides and into public transit. So we really started our transit partnerships about 6 years ago, back in 2016, with a paratransit, on-demand paratransit partnership with MBTA in Boston and a microtransit program in San Clemente with California. And around that same time, we began collaborating with Bonnie at PSTA on the Mobility on Demand program through the FTA Sandbox program at that time. Really the success of these early programs and enhancing mobility for the riders and really helping agencies tackle the system gaps that both Lindsay and Bonnie have chatted about was really, really encouraging. And ever since then, we have seen like this organic agency and university-driven growth to create similar programs, and now run hundreds of such programs around the U.S. with transit agencies and universities. And so I think it was just a natural evolution of where we were, and bringing that system to solve problems that it was designed to address. And it's been a fun and exciting experience ever since then.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Paul. It's exciting to see, where Lyft has how far it's come and where these services are taking us now into the future of mobility. Kristoffer, I have a question for you. Since Spare works directly with transit companies rather than riders, that doesn't mean that Spare can't impact the rider experience. Can you tell us a little bit about how this particular partnership with Lyft improves that experience for everyone, but not just the riders, but operators as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. As you mentioned, we don't work directly with riders, but we do work with the organizations that provide rides for those riders. And therefore, we care a lot about the experience for the riders too. Our goal at Spare is to really make it possible for anyone to live without owning their own vehicle. And in this pursuit, we're always looking for ways to improve the experience for everyone using Spare, both the riders and the operators and administrators and everyone who's actually has some entry point into Spare. The way that it actually helps riders is that we can basically almost like guarantee response time by leveraging the huge existing Lyft network capacity, which is obviously a huge benefit for the riders. They can get rides at lower wait times, more or less 24/7. So that's a major advantage to the riders. Is really that being able to move it into a dependable service for them, something they can depend on, not just going to their doctor's appointment, but also for going and doing groceries and other things that they're looking to do on a daily basis, or if they're looking to go home from the bar in Colorado State. Another way that it benefits the operator, it really gives them an incredible tool to add to add additional capacity to a service without needing to, turn on additional dedicated vehicles. So they can, they can delay additional dedicated vehicles being added to the service, and be able to meet demand from riders basically at any given time, and then really figuring out like what makes sense for us in terms of how many dedicated vehicles we have versus what do we connect to in terms of the non-dedicated side. So that's some of the ways that we impact the rider experience.
Brianna, if I can add to this, I have a story about, I'm thinking about how easy it's been to use the Spare system. Both our riders, which have a really positive experience with it, it's really user-friendly for them, very modern. And on the backside, Kristoffer's talking about operators. So when Ramride was first bringing back our dedicated fleet, which would have been August of 2021, so last fall, in the summertime, the COVID restrictions were still really unclear whether our university would be able to fully reopen again. And of course, there were even more strict rules around transportation services than other industries like education as a whole. And I didn't know until maybe mid-July that I was going to be able to bring my fleet back. And because of the timing, and I was chatting with Spare and our Lyft partners around what do we do, we didn't see or get trained on the Spare system until a week before I launched my operations. And I'll be honest, I was telling my team, I was like, it's this or nothing. This is the service that can turn on quick enough for us. And what they were describing to us in the system, I'm like, yes, this is going to meet our needs. This sounds great. So we put a lot of trust in Spare, and it all went super smoothly. We literally got trained that week before we launched with no issues. And as I mentioned, we're volunteer run. So it's our volunteers that are the operators out there. So we are training people every night how to use this system on top of just other things related to our type of service, like how to recognize signs of alcohol poisoning and what to do if you see that in a vehicle. And it's smooth every single time. So I just want to give that huge compliment to the Spare system, that it is user-friendly both for riders and for operators. And we are a testament to that every Friday and Saturday night.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, no, it's obviously something we're working quite hard on how we constantly improve the user experience for everyone, because not everyone has done these systems before, like you mentioned with the volunteers who maybe just pick up one shift, and you got to train them just for that shift. So it's been a big focus area for us for a very long time to make it a good user experience for everyone that touches the technology. So thanks for that.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay, for sharing that fun story, and Kristoffer for elaborating a bit more on the partnership and how it impacts the rider. But moving beyond the rider experience, a mixed fleet model can have massive improvements on the operational side of things, as we just learned from Lindsay. For those of you who are unaware, a mixed fleet model is when you run your own fleet, but also use third-party providers for additional services, such as outsourcing your microtransit service to a locally contracted fleet. Lindsay, we just heard from Lindsay around how her operator's experience has been running a mixed fleet model. Bonnie, we'd love to hear from you, and if you can elaborate a bit more on your rider feedback that you've received.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, our ADA paratransit service, we use a contracted fleet, but it is a dedicated fleet for the most part. We have sedans and wheelchair accessible vehicles running around doing our pre-scheduled paratransit trips throughout Pinellas County. However, it's been really helpful to have the mobility on demand program and using the leverage the existing capacity from companies like Lyft to be able to provide service when we have some capacity constraints on our existing service. With the dedicated fleet, we'll run into sometimes where we don't have that many dedicated vehicles out on the road, they're running behind, and we can quickly offer a customer an MOD ride. We'll just let them know, if you want your pre-scheduled paratransit service, it's running a little bit behind, or would you like to take this on-demand service? We could get it there, a vehicle to you in 10 minutes. Most of the time, everyone's really happy to take the lower response time, and it eases, some of those difficult times that we'd have with the customer. And we've had, again, just amazing feedback from the riders. They really love the service. And like I mentioned before, they're able to do lots of different types of trips that they weren't able to do before. I think previously, before we had the mobility on demand service, customers were sticking pretty much to doctors, groceries, other medical appointments. And now customers are going to visit friends and family. They're going out to restaurants. They're going to festivals because they know that they can count on whether it's our dedicated fleet or getting in mobility on demand ride to and from where they want to go. They have that reliable way to get around whenever they want to go. So it's been super great.
Yeah, I love hearing more about the type of mobility freedom that these types of services offer people. It's really great to hear. And it's clear that private-public partnerships like this are going to be an integral part of growing transit operations in the future. And to ensure that transit programs are the first choice for riders, it's important to provide the best experience possible. So with that in mind, I'd like us to define with this group what a top-tier experience for riders is and how partnerships like this one can help us get there. So this is more of a group question, but Paul, I'd love for you to kick us off here. Why do you think public-private partnerships are important and how can they shape the future of transit?
Me in the hot seat first, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, our goals with these partnerships have always been about like expanding mobility and access to transit, as, Bonnie and Lindsay have alluded to. And, we've really seen how these partnerships, have, really transformed the lives of the people in these programs. As Bonnie was saying, it's improving access to jobs, to healthcare and social activities. It's really breaking down what are true transportation access barriers and overcoming social isolation. They've just been really impactful in that way. And I think the voice of the riders speaks volumes about why these programs, are so important for transit now and into the future. MBTA has run surveys where riders have routinely noted how their on-demand programs have in their words, changed their lives, right? And a partner in Santa Monica, Big Blue Bus, where we run on-demand paratransit program there, he's gone to many APTA conferences and spoken about like the flip of the switch of where paratransit riders are not coming in to complain, but like actively coming to board members when paratransit isn't even on the agenda and talking about how these programs have transformed their lives and made such a difference. And I know Bonnie and team have experienced that as well. And I can say these things, but I really think like, again, the voice of the riders are the best. So I just dropped in the chat here some great videos that have been put together by riders from our Dakota County program in Minnesota, which is a jobs access program. And they've done some great videos on exactly the impact that those riders have felt in their lives from these programs. So in the end, I would think these partnerships between agencies and between orgs like Spare and Lyft will continue to grow in importance as we all continue to find new ways to collaborate and innovate to really and truly, as I like to say, decouple the right to mobility from auto ownership. We're really giving people the right to move in all circumstances. And I think that importance will continue to grow.
Yeah, if I could add on to what you mentioned, Paul, I don't think that we'd be able to provide the type of service that we are in Pinellas County without this type of partnership that we have with Lyft. Because, I mean, riders now, they're able to, they expect a low response time that we just wouldn't be able to provide with our dedicated fleet, especially with our traditional ADA paratransit model with a 30-minute pickup window you need to schedule in advance. The trip may or may not be shared. There's just a lot of restrictions around traditional ADA paratransit. And if you want to give riders increased mobility, I think this is what you've got to do. And the results have been great. And as you can also you can give the riders increased mobility, but also keeping costs pretty low by partnering with TNCs. I think it's a win-win for both the rider and for the transit agency.
I would So I echo everything that Paul and Bonnie are sharing for sure. I could, similar to what Bonnie shared, I could not do the level of service that I do today if it wasn't for our partnerships with Spare and Lyft. They allow me to focus on what I'm good at and what my team is trained to do, which really for us is working with students and student development and building learning experiences and helping them access education. And we know transportation is a significant portion of that. And so Lyft is helping me fill gaps in my service. Spare has built and is maintaining a really modern dispatch system for us. I'll add another thing that I really appreciate about public-private partnerships is I connect with Safe Ride programs around the nation pretty regularly, and we are a niche type of transportation service. And I certainly learn from my peers across at other institutions, no doubt. But in my conversations with Lyft and Spare, they're working with so many different other types of transportation services. And so when I'm hitting a challenge, I have these great colleagues that are saying, oh, well, in the Dakotas, I'm doing this. And in California, we're doing this. And this is how someone is doing this down in Florida. And there are transportation systems that maybe are much larger than mine, but they're able to help me translate what their creativity and their program could look like in mine. And so it has been another resource of experts for me and another way to indirectly connect with colleagues around the nation to learn what I can take from their program and do better with mine. So that networking has also been a significant help for us.
Yeah, I love all of the comments there. I totally agree with everything that's been said there. Again, like we, at Spare, we're strong believers of public-private partnerships, and although to, really improve access to mobility for everyone and make it possible for anyone to live without owning their own vehicle. And there's so many great things. I know this webinar has been all around, like, how do we mix both dedicated vehicles and non-dedicated providers? There's so many great things with both of those entities, and being able to mix both of them, seamlessly put together will only drive transportation as a whole really to be better. Just making it much more dependable to get around, be able to offer service when you didn't offer service before, for example, in the nighttime, and just be able to. And one thing that's really exciting to me is just being able to provide more tools to our partners, such as CSU and PSTA, around how they can better serve their riders. So, even when their dedicated vehicles may not be able to handle that demand in the moment. So I'm a huge believer in this, and I think the future of transportation, we're going to see a lot more of these providers being in the mix, and being able to use providers that are already out there already. That's something that I always think about when talking to people in the industry around, like, why are you thinking of investing immediately in new vehicles and everything that comes in addition to that, with maintenance and all stuff like that? Why don't we instead look at what providers are already out there in the streets? There's tons of cars that are already driving out there. What if some of they could be used for your service? So I think we have a very, very positive future ahead of us, looking at these public-private partnerships.
Awesome. Well, the future sounds bright for mobility and in transit. I want to ensure, does any of our other panelists have anything else they want to add to this topic? Okay, well then I guess we can move into our Q&A portion of today's webinar. We do have some questions in here, and kicking us off is a question actually for Kristoffer again. So Kristoffer, this question says, how can our agency get started using a TNC today, and what are the limits to what Lyft can be added to our operations?
Yeah, so the way we've set up the integration is that it can be really enabled with a flick of a button anywhere in the US. So just in a few hours, we could enable it. We're also looking at bringing that capability to Canada. And in addition to that, we're obviously also working on additional providers to be able to make our partners able to use more providers in that service. For example, with PSTA, we also have an integration with UServe and some other ones that we're working on right now as well.
Wonderful. We have another one from Estella, and this is for Paul. So we have limited Lyft vehicles in our community. Through this partnership, does Lyft provide any incentives to increase the Lyft driver pool, especially during early morning and late night service?
Yeah, I think we'd have to chat with you about where it is. I mean, there are the Lyft network is always growing, right? So I'd have to understand the specifics of your community and the time when you're looking to run the service. But generally, for most of the programs we've been able to implement, there's been plenty of Lyft service available in order to assist with the needs of the programs at hand. But happy to chat offline around your specific needs and program parameters.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. We have another question for you. So these are from Kate, and there's a couple questions, so we'll just go through one by one. Can you speak more to the logistics of how this works? Are there federal funds involved?
Yeah, I think it depends on the program, right? So every agency runs theirs in different ways. I'd let Bonnie speak to her program, but there are plenty of programs that we run that have had federal funding involved with them. So it all depends on each agency.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Bonnie, do you want to add? Oh, perfect.
I would say, unfortunately, sometimes federal funds have requirements around drug and alcohol testing or vehicle inspections, but there is some federal funding that you can use on companies like Uber and Lyft. I think, like Paul said, it kind of just depends on what kind of program and what federal funding you're using. But in some cases, we have been able to use federal funds on our mobility on demand services.
Perfect. And another question, Bonnie, maybe you can answer this one as well, but Paul, also feel free to chime in. This is also from Kate. We don't have any lifts with wheelchair seating. How do you make an equivalent service for them?
Go ahead, Bonnie, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can start. Our mobility on demand program, we have a bunch of providers, not just Lyft on the platform. So Lyft does actually subcontract with a local wheelchair provider here in Pinellas County to provide the accessible services for the mobility on demand program. And we're looking to, expand that possibly in the future, add more capacity as interest in the program grows.
Yeah, I can just pile on to Bonnie. We've done this very similar as we've done with PSTA and other locations. It's all oftentimes a partnership between us and another organization that's running wheelchair accessible vehicle services in the area, or a third-party operator. A lot of the trips under these programs are actually for ambulatory riders, so the regular sedans on the Lyft network can fulfill those. But for the remainder of the trips that do need a wheelchair accessible vehicle, the agency or Lyft partners with that organization to help fulfill that portion of the service.
Perfect. Our next question, similar to I think what Estella had asked, but maybe we can get a different answer as well. What level of Lyft services do you need to make this successful? We typically only have 1 to 5 on the road in our town at a time.
Yeah, I think it all depends on on the demand of the program and the supply. Lyft is a network, right? And so cars shift where demand is as part of the network working. And so as demand increases, the supply of vehicles often increase in those areas as well. I'd have to, again, know the intricacies of the specific community, but for most of our programs, there's always been an opportunity to leverage the existing capacity within the Lyft network to fulfill the trips of the program.
Yeah, I'll just add that working with Paul and his team, you can kind of, once you get started, you it's easy to set up the service, define the parameters, draw the geofence boundaries for the service. And like Paul said, when there's demand, the drivers will have an incentive to come and work at those hours or those areas. So it might be a little slow to get started, but I think most of the time you can accomplish anything.
Awesome. We have another question here. So this one is to both Bonnie and Lindsay. What have you learned about customer demands by shifting towards a mixed fleet model?
Oh boy. I think, what we at PSCA wanted to get more riders to try our mobility on demand program. I think some riders are hesitant. Maybe they haven't had a good experience with the TNC. They don't have an app or a smartphone. So we provide a call center for all of our mobility on demand service. So when we combined our call centers for the mobility on demand program with our ADA paratransit service, that's when we really saw the service take off. So when riders would call in, they want to make a pre-scheduled paratransit service. Maybe we don't have the exact time that they want, or we'll say you need to book a return time for your doctor's appointment. And they'll say, well, I don't know what time I'll be done with the doctor. Then that's when we have the chance to tell them more about the mobility on demand program and just say, just call this same phone number back when you're ready to go, and we can, we'll sign you up right now, and then call when you're ready, and we'll get you a mobility on demand ride when your doctor's appointment is over. And that's really gotten us to shift riders into trying the mobility on demand program. And like I said, once they give that on demand a try, they realize they can rely on it and then take the service for all their different types of needs. So returning for medical appointments and the fun stuff.
I've learned a lot, but maybe two things that are applicable for this group. One of the things that I really appreciate about the Spare system is being able to get real-time rider feedback in learning about their experience in our vehicles. We've always collected rider feedback, but before we could only do it at the very end of the night. And by then, our end of the night is 3 a.m. And so we didn't have a huge response. But as riders were finishing their ride and immediately able to give so many stars, be able to talk about specific highlights of the ride and then write in something, it was a healthy affirmation of, yes, our students care about low wait times, efficiency in the service. No doubt that matters. But I actually found most of our students, almost what mattered more to them was having an engaging conversation with their driver and navigator. That's what they really wanted, was a really positive experience in the car with the people who were driving them, that these are fellow Rams of theirs, and they didn't want this to be like some separation of, oh, you're my operator tonight or my driver tonight, and I just need to get to where I need to go. They actually really looked forward to the conversations, and that's what we got consistent feedback about in a positive way. So that was good. The other thing that I don't think I would have been able to learn without my partnership, particularly with Lyft, was we are able to give some free Lyft rides nationwide. And I focus those free nationwide rides around times where students are less likely to be in our community, but may still really benefit from having an option to help them prevent possibly driving under the influence. So think like spring break or New Year's, so times when classes are usually not in session and students have left town. And I've learned a lot about where my students go over break because I can see where they're taking their rides, and I wouldn't have been able to have that data otherwise. And so that was an unexpected insight, that I'm able to see where my folks are when they're not in town, and then when they're using those rides. So I'm able to see that timing of, oh, my students aren't necessarily waiting until 2 a.m. to get their ride home. They're not like closing out the bars. Like actually they're taking a lot of rides from just personal addresses and going home closer to midnight. And so kind of seeing what the end of the night looks like. So those were maybe some unexpected lessons that I got, on top of, again, all of the learning that I've gotten from indirectly from nationwide colleagues doing transportation, because Spare and Lyft has shared with me what they've done to be creative in their services or to fill the gap. So yeah, those will just be some that I highlight.
Awesome. Well, we are coming close to time, but we do have just a couple more questions that we're going to get through. This next one is for Paul. Paul, how has Lyft navigated the paratransit world to ensure they meet the stringent ADA requirements? Many agencies around the country are hesitant to utilize Uber or Lyft for fear of non-compliance issues.
Yeah, put me in the hot seat, huh?
Once again.
I would say, and I can let Bonnie speak to this as well. I think it's good to hear the agency's perspective as well. I think how we've navigated this is always alongside our partners, right? Ultimately, the partners are running these programs, right? And so they've set up these rider choice on-demand programs where riders opt in according to the shared mobility guidance that's laid out by the FTA that makes it clear under certain circumstances where you can use Lyft services to meet the demands of those programs. And we've always worked with our partners, and you have big agencies that have done that. You have PSTA, right? You have MBTA that's been doing this, RTC of Southern Nevada and in Vegas. And there's just a lot of agencies that have worked through the process of getting these programs set up that we'd be happy to put folks in touch with around how they got to the end point where they could more comfortable with using Lyft as a provider for their service.
Yeah.
Also,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
I was just gonna say, I'd be happy to talk with anyone that is interested in doing a similar type of partnership with the on-demand paratransit. But what we've done at PSTA, and I know lots of other mid-size and larger agencies have done, is the on-demand program sits on top of the traditional pre-scheduled ADA paratransit service. So you offer the traditional ADA paratransit, then riders can opt into the on-demand program. So it's their choice of what provider they want to take. You have to be a little bit careful about, how you offer the on-demand. You can't say, oh, we're not going to give you the ADA service, we're just sending a Lyft. But as long as you keep that line in there, you can have both services running and give the incentive for riders to try the on-demand program. And in so many cases, the riders really do prefer it. So if they have the option, they'll naturally start shifting their trips over.
And I was just going to add that if we've helped many of our partners navigate these compliance requirements. So yeah, we're happy to help out and look at any kind of specific examples.
We have another question that kind of builds off of that, Bonnie. Has anything surprised you about the rider's choice between Lyft and your dedicated fleet? And maybe Lindsay, after, you can also provide some context.
Yeah, like I said, in most cases, when the rider tries the on-demand program, they're going to start shifting trips over. I think some riders are a little bit nervous about, when you call in on demand, you could get a response time of 4 minutes or 20 minutes. And some riders, especially for the A leg to their doctor's appointment, really like to know my pickup will be at this time or this time frame, because they get a little bit nervous. There are some riders, at least on the ADA paratransit side, which is for riders with disabilities, there are some riders that the on-demand service isn't going to work great for. Riders with cognitive disabilities probably aren't going to, be able to use the on-demand service, but of course they can still use traditional ADA paratransit. But many riders do travel with a PCA at all times. So, the PCA can help them find their Lyft vehicle and, make sure everything works out on getting into the vehicle and reaching the destination. So, yeah, Lindsay.
I do not have a helpful addition to this question.
That's okay. Maybe something that you can answer, Lindsay, is there's a question around, are there any exciting developments on the horizon that have opened up because of this partnership?
I think I've mentioned that we are working towards this integration where students will be able to have the agency or the choice to choose between a Lyft or a Ram ride at the same time, and what, you know, based on wait times, based on cost, and what makes sense for them. I'm excited about that. And I know there's some potential additional modes of transportation that we're working to integrate into that. So I'm really excited about the integration, both because of the agency and choice, but the education, that there could be some options in there that students may not have thought about otherwise. And knowing that students are just bombarded with so much information from the institution to help them be academically successful, it's overwhelming for them. So the more streamlined I can be in that education for my students, or, you know, my writers, that it just, I'm really excited about them really understanding all their choices and their options in that way. Yeah, and then of course, you know, the 24/7 rides nationwide, I could not have done that before. So that's also been, it's a development that I think we will continue to perfect about how to make that most budget efficient. And yeah, so I know we'll continue to perfect that, but those are two big developments that, while I would never wish COVID on the world, these are positives that have come, these are some positive lessons that I've learned through that I was forced to learn. And I'm glad there's been something positive from that, this worldwide thing we're going through.
Yeah, I like that half or glass half full approach to the last 2 years. So I'm sure we all appreciate that. We do have another question, and this is for the whole group. In your opinions, how have you found is the best way to educate customers to take that first ride?
I think I mentioned when we've combined our call centers, riders looking for, at least for paratransit, with traditional pre-scheduled service. When you have a pre-scheduled A leg and a pre-scheduled B leg and the rider is ready early, say, well, we can try to get our dedicated fleet, the traditional paratransit service, to you, but it'll take, you know, 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. We're not sure. Or, you know, you could try our on-demand service. And then, so our call takers can answer the where's my ride calls, do the pre-scheduled reservations, but also book those mobility on-demand trips. That's gotten riders, you know, to test out the service, maybe when they had been hesitant before because, you know, you put a credit card down or whatever, you know, hesitancy about joining. That's how they start, and then take it from there.
If I'm going to build off of that, I really like what Bonnie's saying here around like trying to educate riders and customers at, you know, specific times where we see it really benefit them, but also obviously educate them more broadly. So one of the things we've seen is, you know, have some material, you know, it could be written material, it could be video or even audio explaining kind of how it works, what to expect, how to, you know, how this differs from other providers. So just like providing many different avenues to educate people on it. But I really like the more like tactical approach too, because, you know, what we've seen is that there's a, you know, quite big uptake in the beginning, and then after some time you've got to, you know, put together some metrics and analysis on figuring out, okay, who of our riders haven't tried this service out. Maybe we should try and do a little bit more directed communication towards those, and or understand kind of why they may be hesitant. And that may be an opportunity for us to develop some better education material for understanding kind of what their challenges are and try to address those challenges.
Yeah, I think both what Bonnie and Kristoffer mentioned are helpful, right? In a moment of need is a great time to introduce that service where they see the immediate benefits immediately. And there also often are broad materials where I can add to this is a couple innovative things that I've seen on top of that, which is I've seen some agencies use through the certification process to the trip to come in to get certified for ADA or recertified for ADA. They offer a Lyft trip at that time, and that is a time to introduce them to the service as part of that process, and that's been super successful. And then we've also seen people, you know, in the end, for reluctant customers, word of mouth is the best, right, between customers. And so these people are part of the same program and part of the same social groups, and we've seen it spread that way. But on top of that, in Santa Monica, they've had individuals that are in the program sit at the local library or senior center once a week, and as volunteers that train new people that are coming into the program on how to use TNCs as part of that.
I'll add one brief thing. I have a captive audience because I'm working with CSU students and they already pay a small fee to use RamRide. So of course I can use this language around you're paying for the service, make sure you're getting your money's worth, But one thing we are intentional about is thinking about how we're communicating with our marginalized students. And we believe that if a service serves those that are most marginalized, then it serves everyone. So I think about students that may be fearful of using my service for some reason, or feel like they could be unsafe or targeted. So for example, it is fairly common for folks to be intoxicated when you use my service, right? And that's one of the main goals of RamRide is prevent drunk driving. And we will get first-year students, which we know are particularly susceptible to over drinking and engaging in alcohol-related behaviors often. And they'll say, well, gosh, if I get in the car and I'm under 21 and I've been drinking, and what if the fellow Ram driving is someone that works in my residence hall? They have an ethical bound that they have to report me. That's one of the rules of working in our residence halls, that they have to report students that they know are intoxicated and under 21. And so we do not allow resident hall employees or student employees to serve as our drivers or navigators. We won't put them in the car to make sure that conflict of interest will not impact our riders. But then I even think about how do we specifically support students and let them know that we're thinking about them like my undocumented students, like my students of color, like my queer students. And so we do specific training with our drivers and navigators, and we have specific policies to help put in some level of protection. And so that's something I think that everyone can think about. How are we serving the most marginalized? Because if we're serving them, we're serving all.
Of course. Well, thank you so much to our amazing panelists for joining us today and chatting a bit more about this topic and how to provide a top-tier transit experience for your riders. Thank you for everyone who joined. We look forward to our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.